Hey YouTube, this is an FC I've been working on and off since around the PC Player SH Quiz Grind era. It's a Wiitar Overchart of To Hell and Back by Symphony X that Threa made. If you're unfamiliar with the concept of Wii overcharts, you take a normal overchart, which is a kind of chart that's intentionally made with way more notes than the instruments in the song call for, and make it entirely consist of tapping patterns, no strums or hopos at all. In these charts, it's tradition to overchart everything except the guitar solos, which are just the original chart solo converted to all taps. This one wasn't that hard on normal speed, so I did it on 135. On this speed, it's just under 7 minutes long with 9,154 notes, meaning the average notes per second of this chart is 21.7, and that's including the two solos that function as breaks, so it's pretty fast. Most of my practice on this chart was spent on lower speeds getting methods set into muscle memory that were somewhat clean but most importantly, consistent. For a while I did some of these ascending trip patterns with trip zigs instead of quads to mitigate excess inputs, but it made me miss like 10% of the time, and when that pattern is 4 minutes deep into this pretty difficult chart and repeats a lot, I didn't want to take that chance for the grind. Let's get into the breakdown of the FC itself. This song's intro immediately gets into tapping patterns with little slide bursts. The slide at the start here is just to maintain a consistent tapping rhythm. I do it rather than double tap or double one hand because it makes it to where I don't have to think of speed adjustments to get back on tempo, or method adjustments to get back onto the right input orientation. As discussed in a previous video of mine, a huge part of high-level tapping play in this game is ensuring that at the beginning of each pattern, and usually the beginning of each beat line, you're leading with your tapping hand. There are a few instances in which leading with your fretting hand might be more consistent for some players or some patterns, but for people who are just starting out, it's a good rule of thumb to use your tapping hand. When you do this in combination with throwing in methods that decrease the speed necessary for some patterns, like the 4-finger sliding here for the fast blue-orange trills, or the 2-finger disjoint rake tap here for the ascending castle-like trills, you get the double benefit of using as little stamina as possible, as well as staying in complete mental control of where you are in the chart at any given point. That second part might sound a little weird, but some spammy playstyles are more oriented to giving little concern to each specific note and focus instead on throwing out as many inputs as possible. Cloniero doesn't punish for this gameplay style, in fact it rewards it in moderation. The main drawbacks are that it reflects poorly on the player's perceived skill, introduces a bit of not actually random but effectively random aspect to gameplay, which makes correcting for mistakes far harder, and ultimately will make you far less capable of longer form accomplishments that require consistency over time. Mastering that aspect of gameplay will however lead to faster section-based FC accomplishments and a more diverse understanding of high-level sliding techniques and their use cases, so it's certainly worth practicing that gameplay style sometimes. As an aside, if you want specific gameplay advice, I don't mind answering questions in my Discord server. If you want to join, the link will be in the description. Luckily, after the intro, the verses in the first half of the song are relatively easy for me. It's just patterns that I hit as either quads or trips with a few of these trill things that are interrupted partway through with an open note. These I handle by doing a bit of a ghosty but consistent method of de-anchoring entirely and hitting them like 4 open note zigs, with the final fretted zig doing an extra quint input. It looks tricky, but I hardly ever missed here on any speed. Between these easy parts though has some very tricky open note tapping tech, which is ridiculously complex. I already tried breaking this down bit by bit a few times and I couldn't even make sense of what I wrote or said, so I'll just stick to the main takeaways. You've got to de-anchor everything in between every single pattern. Triplet trill bursts like this are very hard to alternate method orientation for over and over, so I double one-hand the quads to start each trill with my right hand. This pattern at the end is essentially a slide quad chimney. That pattern cycles twice and ends with more easy verse stuff. After that, there's another identical section that concludes with standard quad chimneys, which were awkward to remember and swap up the method instead of just trying to double one hand instinctively again. I assume this part is the chorus, which is super easy, just zigs with occasional breaks. Right here might seem a little odd because I didn't ghost and I maintained a consistent tapping speed. That's because I started that particular zig sequence with a fretted zig to do the trill smoothly at the end. At the end of the chorus, I just do an extra tapping input so that the double red here gets registered by the game resetting the input at the cost of a few extra ghosts, and we get to the first break, an easy in comparison but still kick-ass guitar solo. The part right after the solo that separates the first half from the second faster half of the song might look really simple compared to the rest of the chart, but for some reason I missed here extremely often, probably because of over-rolling my inputs and mistiming the difference between the end of a descending tapping motion and the start of an ascending one. It's really awkward in execution. The ending of it speeds up to transition to the fast riffs. Threa set these patterns up so that alt tapping them without doing any extra input sets each of the following patterns up with the right tapping orientation. So the difficulty isn't necessarily in the unconventional nature of the tapping rhythms, but more so in performing these slightly complicated patterns very fast for a long time and without mistiming anything. These double ascending trip burst things are what I was talking about at the start of the video. I hit them like quads in this FC, but it's technically cleaner to do trip zigs. When I did that, most of the transitions felt harder though, especially the one that leads into open notes. After the 3 quads here, the final one ends with a tapping tapping input, so I just stop myself and unanchor. One of the fundamentals of CH gameplay is to ensure that each pattern concludes before swapping anchors, so my natural muscle memory when doing that quad tapping input pulls off before I unfront the anchor, hitting the first screen and open note of this sequence. After that, it's as simple as doing 4 tapped inputs for the rest without anchoring and concluding these patterns here as you'd expect. This variation of the tapping pattern reverses the slower bits and makes the trip bursts into descendings. Same idea as the other, but most of this part is easier and more consistent than the previous, besides right here. For some reason I mental blocked this transition a lot, which I can't understand why. It's not that bad compared to everything else. Weird. Next is the on and on part, which isn't that bad in isolation. It was just very difficult by this part in the run because the stamina of tapping for so long was starting to kick in. It consists of transitions back and forth between normal patterns and slide bursts. The transitions off of each slide burst are strangely awkward and hard for my brain to process, which is why they're so sloppy in this FC. After this, it's right back to the stamina burning fast riff and verse. It's the same as the previous, but this time with an 1100 note streak higher. No pressure. After the second verse is another on and on part. This one concludes with the second guitar solo of the song, aka the final break. After this solo is the final stretch of tons of missable patterns that were also seen earlier in the chart, so I won't double explain them, but there's a few parts worth highlighting. This second slide sequence here happens on a BPM slowdown, so I had to remember to not keep sliding as fast as the past 3 minutes of this song's BPM, and this outro sequence here had slightly changing BPM bits every so often. That's because the original chart of this just had this as one big sustained note, so the BPM changes in the middle didn't really matter, but you can really feel them with a method like disjoint raking. That's why I panic spammed at the end. All my focus went into making sure I did those disjoints at the right time. I'm so glad this FC is done with having been grinding it so long. It's a great grade 17 tapping FC. Speaking of the grade system, AlexGH3 set up a bot in my Discord server so that my community can expand the grade system with whatever chart they want, effectively making the system into a public works difficulty indexing project. As mentioned earlier, if you'd like to join, the link is in the description. Here's the FC. That would make sense if there's a rake strumming Overchart skill. Sup 3.
Damn you, Shmooey.
I would really appreciate it if you took Brandon to a nearby hamburger shop. Thank you.
I'll check that in just a second. Thanks for the money, skill issue, and/or Spankly. Listen, I don't know how you operate. been grinding this for a fucking year, bro. Yes, dude. Oh my god. Holy fucking shit.
Why? Shut up.
Oh my god.
Shut up.
So much fucking nerves, I broke into a sweat. I'm gonna lay down for like 5 minutes.